Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin Daf Nun Daled. Today's daf is sponsored by Rosalind Jaffe in loving memory of her mother Dita Mulrad Duba Fega Bat Menachem. My mother was a true Yiddish mama who instilled Torah values in her children. She was proud of all my academic accomplishments and would have gotten much nacha from my daf yomi studies. Today's daf is dedicated to the release of Ohad Ben Ami or Levi and Eli Sharabi after 491 days in captivity, wishing them a refuah shlema and praying for the safe release of the rest of the hostages. Okay, today's daf, a bit of a warning. It's not an easy daf in the slightest. It's a lot of drashot. We're going to have to familiarize ourselves with the verses in the Torah and complicated daf because we're going from a different perspective because we're going to get into the Mishnah, which discusses homosexual relations and the fact that one who engages in them in homosexual sexual relations is liable by stoning. And it's a complicated topic to discuss in modern times. We don't have enough time in a Daf Yomi class to really go into it, but just be aware it's a sensitive topic and it's one of those modern issues that is being grappled with and needs grappling with. And that's what I have to say on the topic right now in the context of the time that we have in our class. So this will be a bit of a long daf. Brace yourselves. There's a study guide, which is very helpful, I hope. What I did in the study guide at the beginning is I brought all the verses that we're going to be using today because it's really important to have them. Have them in front of you while you're learning so you understand. The first thing we have to remember is something we mentioned previously, which is Vayikra chapter 18 and chapters 21 repeat a lot of the same issues, but sometimes a different wording. And the main difference, it's all about the forbidden relations. In Yud Chet 18, it's all the warnings, what is forbidden to do. And in 20, it's all the punishments. And in order to be liable for something, get punished, the Torah has to both tell you it's forbidden to do, and it has to then tell you you will get a punishment for it. So for every issue we're going to discuss, you're going to have to find a warning and a punishment. Okay, if you don't have a pasuk that says both the warning and the punishment, then we're going to have an issue, and that's why the Gemara is going to be searching for both warnings and punishments. So we ended yesterday with this pasuk. What we were dealing with is the machloket, and again there was a debate what Rabbi Yehuda in fact said, but we went back to the version in our Mishnah and not the one that the Gemara first brought, which is that Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah says that if somebody has relations with his father's wife, who's also his mother, which often happens, but not always, that your father's wife is your mother. But if it's a father's wife and the mother, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're only liable one sin offering if you did this unwittingly, and because obviously there's no thing of one death or two deaths. But if, according to the rabbis, you're liable twice, one because it's your father's wife and one because it's your mother. And now we're going to go into what we saw yesterday was how does Rava explain? We had a few different options of how to explain Rabbi Yehuda. In the end, we rejected all, then we ended with Rava. And we're now going to bring a braita that holds like Rava. So for that, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to put up the study guide and we're going to go through the psukim there. So the main pasuk we're going to start with is, we're going to start with two psukim, okay? The main one we dealt with last time, that Rava talked about, and that's going to come at the second part of this braita, is Ervat Avicha ve'ervat imcha lo tegale imcha hi. We said three sections, Ervat Avicha, Ervat imecha, and lo tegale, and imcha hi. And what we said was that those three are relating to, there's three different possibilities. There's a woman who is your father's wife who's not your mother. That is understood in Ervat Avicha. Then there's your mother, who's not your father's wife. That is in Ervat Imcha. Okay, that's if your father either raped your mother and didn't marry her, or it was out of wedlock. And then we had Imchahi, which teaches your father's wife who is your mother, meaning you're only liable though because she's Imcha. Okay, if it's both, you're going to only be chayav because of Imcha. That was the way Rava explained Rabbi Yehuda's drasha. So now we're going to have a braita like Rava, but we're going to start with the psukim in the punishment. Okay? The punishment psukim, okay, the way I organized this is I brought all the psukim in Vayikra Yud Chet, which we're going to deal with, number one, right, mother and father's wife, which, by the way, we didn't yet read the next pasuk. Maybe we should read it now, okay? Let's just start off with understanding the psukim that we're going to darshan. So I just read to you, Ervat Avicha Ervat Imcha Lo Tegale Imcha Hi Lo Tegale Ervata. Right, so that really is about your father and your mother, which really we understood to mean your father's wife who's your mother, or your mother who's not your father's wife, or all the possibilities. Then it says, Ervat eshet avicha lo tegale ervat avicha hi. Now, according to the way we just started, this pasuk is entirely unnecessary because this pasuk seems to be talking about someone who's not your mother, which we already said is included there. This is your father's wife. It sounds like your father's wife who's not your mother, but we already kind of learned that in the pasuk before. We're going to have to see what Rabbi Yehuda does with this. Then we have the Zachar. I'm skipping the father's brother. We're going to get to this later. But the main things we're going to cover is that topic. Then there's the Zachar, and then there's the Behema. Okay, there's homosexual relations, and then there's the animal. Okay, that we're going to get to all later. But I organized it all by what's in Vayikra Yud Chet in the warnings, and then Vayikra Kaf, which is the punishments. So now let's focus on the punishments for Eshet Aviv, and this is the pasuk that we're going to focus right now. Isha sheyishkavet Eshet Aviv, a person sleeps with a man sleeps with his father's wife. Ervat Aviv Gila. Okay, if you remember, we mentioned at the end of yesterday, we're going to get back to this, that there's a Gzeira Sheva. That's going to be from this Ervat Aviv and Ervat Avicha, okay, which sound the same. Mot yumtu shnehem demehem bam. So both of them die. Demehem bam, we already learned that yesterday. Demehem bam is a reference to stoning. Okay, that's how we're going to know they get stoned. So now let's darshan this pasuk. Tanya Kavate de Rava. So here's the Braita that's going to strengthen Rava, which really is going to be the second part of this Braita, which is going to go back to that pasuk in chapter 18. But now we're in the pasuk in chapter 20, in the punishment. Ish prat lekatan. Okay, so it would have to be, right, you're not going to get punished and killed if you're a minor. Asher yishkavet eshet aviv. Mashma, so eshet aviv sounds like what? Mashma bein eshet aviv shehi imo, bein eshet aviv shelo imo, right? It sounds like your father's wife, no matter what, whether she's your mother or not your mother. But what about category 3? Category 3, remember, is, and by the way, for this, if you look at the second sheet of the study guide, here's a big chart of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan. We're going to fill in parts of this as we go along. So right now we're in Rabbi Yehuda, and we're in the second part of the chart. There's 3 parts. One is the Azhara. The first part is the one we darshaned already yesterday, which we're going to get back to and see how the Braita darshans it in chapter 18, verse 7. The second part of the chart is the punishment, which is the pasuk we're on right now and what Rabbi Yehuda darshans. The third pasuk we're going to get to is that one in Vayikra Chet, Yud Chet Chet, the one we just said, 18, the one 8, which says Ervat Eshet Avicha, Ervat Avicha, which we said according to Rabbi Yehuda is totally unnecessary because we already taught your father's wife who's not your mother. So we're going to have to see how he darshans that pasuk as well. So that's the order that's the order I put in the chart, but we're starting with the middle, the punishment pasuk. I ordered it that way because the Ashara, the one in Vayikra Yud Chet Zayin, is the one we already darshan. So I put it at the top, and that's the one that we're bringing this Braita for, really. But anyway, we're now on this pasuk. So mashma bein eshet aviv sheimo, bein eshet aviv shelo imo. But what about imo sheinu eshet aviv? This is all about you sleep with your father's wife. What about your mother who's not your father's wife? Like we discussed. What if there was a rape and they never got married? What if there was he just had relations with a woman he wasn't married to and never married her? Talmud Lomar, how do we know that that's forbidden and you're going to get punished? Ervat aviv gila mufne lahakish v'ladum imenu gzeira shava. So the second part of that pasuk is unnecessary. If you sleep with your father's wife, obviously ervat aviv gila, you revealed something that was really your father's. The erva of your father. It's like an embarrassment to your father. So that's really not so necessary. It's kind of obvious. That part is open to teach Gzeira Shava, which takes us back to the Ervat Avicha in the first pasuk. Now, in the first pasuk, in the warning, they basically equated, right, your mother, the second section, Ervat Imcha, meant your mother who's not married to your father. So since in that pasuk it's all together, and it says Ervat Avicha, we're going to learn also to the next pasuk through Gzeira Shava that also in the punishment, your mother is also, even if it's your mother and not your father's wife. Motum tu beskila. So now we get to the punishment. Right? So you could have said this yourself, right? Which is, how do we know it's skila and not something else? Because ne'amar kan demehem bam, v'ne'amar ba'ovi yidoni demehem bam. Right here it says demehem bam, and over yidoni it says demehem bam. Right, I looked up to get a better translation of Ovi Yidoni when I was teaching the daf for yesterday. I didn't have it clear in my head. Ov is basically someone who asks from the dead people, and Yidoni is someone who uses sorcery or it's more like trying to figure out signs that basically, guide like what you're going to do or something along those lines, some sort of sorcery. So to try, just like Ov is asking help from the dead, this is like asking help from sorcery to determine what it is you should do, like to make a decision or something. Demehem. So there it says demehem. Bam mal halam b'skila, and there in the pasuk it says specifically stoning. Afkam b'skila, also here stoning. Okay, so that is the onesh. So the Braita says onesh shamanu asara minayim. But how do we know you're warned for those things? Because again, you can't get punished unless the pasuk warns you not to do that. So now we're going to get to the part that's the Braita, just like Rav. Talmud Lomer, ervat avicha lo tigale. Ervat avicha. Okay, it never says, by the way, ervat avicha lo tigale. I want to just show you what they're doing. It says ervat avicha ve'ervat imcha lo tigale. What they're saying is, right, if you block off the words for a minute, ervat imecha, right, and you just read it straight, ervat avicha lo tigale. In other words, the way it reads is ervat avicha and ervat imecha lo tigale. So lo tigale is the verb that refers back to both those things. So that's how they read ervat avicha lo tigale. Okay, so ervat avicha zo eshet avicha. So ervat avicha, that's your father's wife. So now they suggest, which we're going to see is the rabbi's position, maybe ervat avicha doesn't mean your father's wife. Maybe ervat avicha means having a homosexual relations with your father. So how do we know not? Because ne'amar kan ervat avicha lo tigale, v'ne'amar lahalan ervat aviv gilad. This was the Gzera Shava that Rava made reference to. And it's the Gzera Shava we had in the first part of this Braita, which is since Ervat Aviv Gila is in another pasuk about the punishment, and there it clearly means sleeping with your father's mother. And now, how do you know that? Because, right, so let's just keep reading for a minute. Since in Vayikra chapter 20, verse 11, when it says Ervat Aviv Gila, it's talking about when you slept with his wife. This is clearly also in our pasuk talking about when you sleep with your father's wife and not a man who sleeps with his father in a homosexual relation. Now, how does this work? In our pasuk, I'll call it our pasuk because that's the one we started with yesterday. Ervat avicha, ervat imcha lo tkale, right? Imchahi. Now, you could theoretically say ervat avicha is that's having relations with your father, with the man having relations with his father. Ervat imcha is with the mother, and then imchahi, the second part is talking about the ervat imo. Okay. But the pasuk Isha sheyishkavet eshet aviv ervat aviv gila, there's no way to explain that pasuk otherwise. A person who sleeps with his father's wife revealed the erva of his father by sleeping with the wife. The subject of that sentence is sleeping with the wife of the father. So it can't possibly be that there it's talking about homosexual relations. So therefore, we're going to do the Gzera Shava because that says ervat aviv and this says ervat avicha. We're going to assume what's true for one is true for the other. That it's all issue. And again, this is Rabbi Yehuda. The rabbis are not going to have the Gzera Shava at all. And therefore, they're going to say it is Mishkav Zachor with the father. Okay, it is homosexual relation. We'll get there soon. Umashma bein esh taviv shehi imo, bein esh taviv she'enu imo. So again, if we say now ervat aviv is your father's wife, it sounds like just your father's wife that's not your mother, or your father's wife that is your mother, but either way, it's your father's wife. But what about imo? What about your mother? She'ena eshet aviv, which is not the wife of your father. Talmud Lomar, ervatim chalo tegale. Again, this is review. We already knew this. Ervatim cha, because again, why is it review? Because they're bringing a Braita to support what we said before. That was the whole point. We're supposed to be reviewing here. So the ervatim cha comes to say your mother when it's not related, when she's not married to your father. Ainli ella. Now, what's the problem? Well, the mother that's not related to the father that's not married to the father is only in the pasuk about the warning. Right? That your mother is treated as a rayot, whether she's married to your father, whether she's not married to your father. But again, the pasuk with the punishment just said a person who sleeps with his father's wife. It doesn't say the mother. So onesh minayin. How do we know the onesh? Well, again, we're going to go back to that Gzera Shava, and here they're going to spell it out. They actually mentioned this in the first part, but now they're just reviewing it and they're spelling it out more. Again, ervat avicha in the first pasuk, in the warning pasuk, and it says ervat aviv in the punishment pasuk. Now, if you look in that pasuk of ervat avicha, we equate, right? It's all the same. Father, your mother who is your father's wife, your mother who isn't your father's wife, it's all treated as one and the same. So therefore, since we have a Gzera Shava, what's true for that pasuk will be true for the punishment as well. So even though the punishment has zero reference to mother, only father's wife, we're going to assume if it's your mother who's not married to your father, so we have this Gzera Shava going two ways, okay? The Gzera Shava teaches you, right, that the punishment for the mother who's not your father's wife is going to be a punishment, right? And we had it to say that Ervat Avicha must be talking about Ishut in the first pasuk. So it goes in both directions. That's often how Gzera Shavas work. Imchahi. So what's the imchahi? Now this goes back again. Well, this is all Rabbi Yehuda. Imchahi mishum imo tamachayvo v'yatamachayvo mishum eshet af. The fact that it says your mother, she's your mother, is specifically telling you that you're only liable for one thing, which is just because she's your mother, you're not going to have to bring two sin offerings, one because she's your mother, one because she's your father's wife. Okay, that's all Rabbi Yehuda. Now we get to Rabbanan. Ervat avicha mamash. Okay, so now we're going to say the rabbis hold that Ervat avicha has nothing to do with the rest of the pasuk about sleeping with your father's wife. Ervat avicha is a man who sleeps with his father. So they say, but wait, wouldn't you learn a man who sleeps with his father would actually be forbidden not because he's sleeping with his father, but it would be forbidden because of Mishkav Zachal. Haimi ve'et zachar nafka. It should be learned from the pasuk that says ve'et zachar lo tishkav mishkavei isha to'evahi. That's the pasuk forbidding homosexual relations. So shouldn't it be from there? To which they answer, the obvious answer, especially according to the rabbis, l'chayev alav shtayim. It's to say that the rabbis must be saying you're liable to sin offerings. If you do this, not realizing it was a sin and that you would get punished, then you bring a sin offering. Okay, you didn't know it was forbidden, or you didn't know there was punishment associated with it, or something you didn't know was unwitting, and it's your father, you would actually have to bring two sin offerings. One because it was your father, one because it's homosexual relations. Now we're going to say, Uchid Rav Yehuda. And by the way, this explanation that we just suggested, in other words, we don't really know that's what the rabbi said, but they assume that's what the rabbi said. So now they're just going to point out, Uchid Rav Yehuda. This matches Rav Yehuda. Da'amar Rav Yehuda, in other words, Rav Yehuda, we're going to bring an Emorah who says what we think the Tana says to support our reading of the Tana. Now, this first word is very strange. You might have goy, you might have nochri, you might even have a different word. I don't know. By me, it says goy, but I think I would say nochri. Nochri haba alaviv hayav shtayim. There's a Gentile who has relations with his father. He's liable to bring a sin offering twice, or he's liable to do something twice. This Gentile word we're going to get rid of. It doesn't make sense here at all in the context, and in a minute we're going to get rid of it. So let's not make too much of it right now. They're actually going to say it's a Jew. Okay, so let's just assume it's a Jew. We're going to have to come back and say, how do we know it's not a Gentile? So a Jew has relations with his father, chayav shtayim. Haba alachi aviv, chayav shtayim. Also, one has relations with one's uncle, you're liable to as well. Now, where does this come from? This is why I brought that pasuk that I said I wasn't going to go over at the time because it wasn't really related to the broad topic of the day. But because it's brought in, I brought you the pasuk. In Vayikra chapter 18, verse 14, it says, Ervat achi avicha lo tegaleh. And then it says, Elishtolo tikrab dodatcha. Now, the way you would assume the simple reading of that pasuk is, don't reveal the nakedness of your uncle. Don't sleep with his wife because she's your aunt, right? Which means basically the erva of your uncle is really your aunt. The way we understood Ervat Avicha is really your mother, right? But if you're the rabbis who think that Ervat Avicha is your father, then Ervat Achia in homosexual relations, then Ervat Achia Avicha is also your uncle. And then it's saying, and also don't have relations with him and don't have relations with his wife. So, and that we're going to see actually everyone agrees with the reading of that pasuk. Okay, that it's two different things. So now they're going to say, if you're Baal Eshet Aviv, Rav Yehuda says you're also Chayav Shtayim because Ervat Avicha lo tikaleh, don't engage in relations with your uncle, and also Et Zachar lo tishkav. Amarava mistabre milta to Rav Yehuda b'Yisrael b'shogeg u'b'korban. Okay, he says it must be that Rav Yehuda was talking about, and this comes to the Yisrael issue, with a Jew and not a Gentile. It doesn't make sense he'd be talking about a Gentile, and b'shogeg, and when it was done unwittingly, and talking about sacrifice, because whether Chayav Shtayim is there, right? Because there is no Chayav Shtayim when it comes to death penalty, it's got to be shogeg, that we know already. Now, why does it say Haidakamer Nochri? Why does it say Nochri then? Lishnama Alyan, who this is what we call a euphemism, right? We don't want to. They don't want to say a Jew who would do such a thing. So they just call it a Gentile when they really mean a Jew. It's a little bit strange, but that's how to explain it. And how do we know? If it was really talking about a Gentile, Dino Mainiu Ktala, there's no such thing as a sin offering for a Gentile. Gentiles don't bring sin offerings. Gentiles can bring sacrifices to the temple, but not sin offerings. Sin offerings are for Jews. And now remember, Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, they are commanded not to do Giloy Arayot. So they would get punished. What would they get? The death penalty. That's going to be our topic for this week. A lot of this week is going to be the Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, the 7 or maybe not 7 Noach Halos. Sneak preview into what we're going to be getting to. Bitrei katle katlatle, what, you're going to kill them twice? And since their punishment is death, there's no such thing as 2 deaths. So, of course, right now, nowadays we have, life imprisonment, let's say, times 2, but you wouldn't have death times 2. So that's how it must be a Jew. Tanya Nami Hachi. Now, this thing we brought in the name of Rav Yehuda is now we're going to see it's also a Braita. Habal aviv chayav shtayim, habal aviv chayav shtayim. Okay, and here we have support for this from a Braita for what we explained the rabbi's position as being that you're going to be liable too, because again, ervat aviv is engaging in a relationship with your father, not your father's wife, and the uncle is also the uncle and not because you slept with his wife. Now, Ikeda Amre de lo Rabbi Yehuda. Some people say this is not like Rabbi Yehuda. Now, the assumption of the Gemara right now is that, as I mentioned before, the pasuk about the uncle, Rabbi Yehuda actually agrees that the beginning of that pasuk is talking about sleeping with the uncle, and the second part is the aunt. But when it comes to the pasuk Ervat Aviv, they don't understand it that way. So the fact that this Braita says Habal Aviv Chayav Shtayim and the uncle Chayav Shtayim, some people say it's not like Rabbi Yehuda. Right, which seems the obvious. It's not like Rabbi Yehuda because Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think you're Chayav Shtayim. Some people say, wait, even though Rabbi Yehuda doesn't darshan on the pasuk, Aviv, Ervat Aviv, is talking about engaging in relationships with one's father, but you can learn if the uncle you're going to be chayav to, then kavachomer for your father, who you're even more close to in terms of arayot, right? Forbidden relations. Right? How are you related to your uncle that it's such a bad thing? Through your father. So if they're your chayav shtayim, aviv lo kol sheken, all the more so with your father, you be chayav. So while the pasuk might not mean it, but by a kavachomer you would get there. Now, what would be these two options? Can you punish then twice through a kavachomer or not? Is based on a different machloket, which is kamifle b'plukta. These two ikadamris, these two variations of how to understand Rabbi Yehuda. Does he make it liable too in the end for the father? Who, if a man engages in relations with one's father, are you liable too? Which again wasn't the topic of our Mishnah, right? Our Mishnah was the mother who's also the father's wife. But would you say that since for the uncle he thinks you're chayav to, also for the father you'd be chayav to, even though the pasuk doesn't say so? It's all based on a machloket Abaye v'Rava. Mar savar onshim adin, or mar savar ein onshim adin. This is a classic machloket. Usually we say ein onshim adin, which is if din means kavachomer in this context. If you have a kavachomer and you could derive something by kavachomer, can you actually punish someone through a kavachomer derivation? We know kavachomer derivations are a little tricky sometimes. Now, this is a pretty clear-cut one. If you're liable for your uncle to, all the more so you should be liable for your father to. But some people say, no, ein onshim adin. You can't learn a punishment from a kavachomer. So even though it's a great kavachomer, doesn't mean that you can punish. And the other one says you can learn a kavachomer. You can learn a punishment from a kavachomer, and that's the machloket about what Rabbi Yehuda would say about the uncle. That's a total aside. Now we're back to our topic. V'Rabbanan. Now we have to fill in a bunch of these blank slots in the chart according to the rabbis, because we did already, right, a whole bunch of Rabbi Yehuda and how does he darshan these psukim. And now we're going to go to the rabbis. Okay, so we filled in Ervat Aviv, he thinks is Mishkav Sapor with the father. Now we have Rabbanan Asara Eshet Aviv Minalehu. Where does he get a warning for the wife of your father? Because if Ervat Avicha, Ervat Imcha Lo Tegale Imchahi, that's all about the mother. Because Ervat Avicha has nothing to do with the topic. Ervat Imcha and Imchahi is all your mother. What if your father is married to a second wife? Okay, how do we know that that's forbidden? Oh, well, that's obvious. That comes from this next pasuk. If you remember, I read to this to you before. Mi ervat eshet avicha lo tegale. The pasuk after pasuk zayin is pasuk chet. After ervat avicha ervat imcha lo tegale imchahi blah 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 lo tegale ervata. Then it says ervat eshet avicha lo tegale ervat avichahi. Don't sleep with your father's wife. There you have it. It's a warning. Now we're going to obviously have a problem because what does Rabbi Yehuda do with that pasuk? If Rabbi Yehuda learns it all from the pasuk before, it's a totally unnecessary pasuk. So Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda says, oh, what's Ervat Eshet Avicha coming to teach you? That after your father dies, you still are forbidden to have relationships with his wife. The wife he was married to when he was still alive. Now, where are the rabbis going to learn that from? We're in a ping pong here. Well, the second part of that pasuk says Ervat Avichahi. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, Ervat Eshet Avicha already includes if your father dies, you still are forbidden to have relations with his wife. You'll get a punishment if you do, right? You'll get stoned. But now we get to now we get to the rabbis. The rabbis say, no, the first part of that pasuk is just your father's wife. The second part, Ervat Avichahi, that's coming to add your father's wife even after your father dies. So now what's Rabbi Yehuda going to do with the second part of that pasuk, which the rabbis just darshaned what he got from the first part? So Rabbi Yehuda, mishum eshet mishum eshet ish. The way he learns Ervat Avichahi is the way he took Imchahi. Remember, Imchahi meant only for your mother you're going to be liable, right? If it's your mother, who's also your father's wife, you're only liable one. He's going to do the same thing in our pasuk, but with a different conflict of two things. If you have relations with your father's wife, and you're liable, number one, because she's married. Now, this is obviously not after he dies, but when she's still married to him. And you're liable because she's your father's wife, you're still only going to be liable one. That's what he learns from Ervat Avichahi. It's your father's ervat that you're revealing. It's all on account of that. You're only going to get one punishment. That fits with Rabbi Yehuda that we've been saying. His whole approach is one and not two. But wait a minute. Who remembers the Mishnah? Do you remember the Mishnah? The Mishnah said, but in the Mishnah it said, if you remember, there was a machloket Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis specifically about the mother case. In that case, Rabbi Yehuda said one. But then there were all these other cases with Eshet Ish and also something else. And they said, oh, well, you're only chayav one. And they didn't say that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees there. And that's what we're going to read right now. Habal Eshet Av, and it specifically brought our case. A man sleeps with his father's wife. Chayav aleh mishum Eshet Av, umishum Eshet Ish. You're liable for two. Bein b'chaya av, bein lachar mitad av. And you'll be liable even when the father dies. Not for Eshet Ish, but you'll be liable because she was your father's wife. Below Palig Rabbi Yehuda, it doesn't say Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. So how could you say that Ervat Avichahi is specifically coming to tell you you're only liable one, when in the Mishnah it sounded like it was everybody's opinion? So I'm Rabbi Palig B'Braita. Okay, so it doesn't say Rabbi Yehuda disagrees in our Mishnah, but in a Braita it does say he disagrees. So even though it didn't say so in our Mishnah, we'd have to assume he disagrees. V'Rabbanan, okay, we're getting near the end of this long ping pong. Onesh de'eshet aviv la'achar mitaminalahu. Where do you get? So we just explained, right, that from this pasuk of Ervat, Eshet Avicha, Ervat Avicha, one learns it from the beginning, one learns it from the end. That's all warning that if your father dies, it's still forbidden to sleep with his wife. However, what about a punishment? Where does the punishment come from for this? Because again, without, the warning says don't do it, but it doesn't say you get punished. So now we're going to say, Rabbanan, Onesh Eshet Aviv la'achar mitaminalahu. Where does he get it from? So they say, why are we asking according to the rabbis? Because Bishlama Rabbi Yehuda might tell up Gzera Shava. Again, once Rabbi Yehuda has this Gzera Shava between Ervat Avicha and Ervat Aviv, Gila, right? Between the Onesh and the Azhara Pasuk. Again, once we learn by one, we can learn it to the other. So that's very easy. Once you have a Gzera Shava, if you've already included it in the warnings, then it'll be included in the punishments by virtue of the Gzera Shava. Ela Rabbanan, who doesn't have a Gzera Shava Menalahu, exactly the phrase Ervat Aviv Gila that Rabbi Yehuda says is totally extra, which means we can use it for Gzera Shava. Well, the rabbis will take that and they'll say, they'll say, oh, well, Ervat Aviv Gila is totally extra in the pasuk, right? If you sleep with your father's wife, okay, we know Ervat Aviv Gila. You don't need to tell me that. What does it come to teach you? Even if your father dies, it's still considered a violation of your father. B'Rabbanan, one other question to the rabbis. Onesh li'imo she'eno eshet aviv minalahu. Where does he learn a punishment for the mother who's not married to the father? Because again, the pasuk about the punishment only said Isha she'ish kavet eshet aviv, the father's wife. What about the mother who's not the father's wife? So again, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we learned about Gzera Shava. Once in the warning, the mother was included, even though she's not married to the father. It'll also be included in the punishment, but the rabbis don't have that Xer Shava. So Amar of Shisha, last line for this very long-winded sugya, Amar of Shisha, Bereder of Idi, Amar Kra, Imchahi. Because it says Imchahi, Asa'a katuv li'imo she'enu eshet aviv, ki imo she eshet aviv. He basically takes the pasuk about the warning, but he says that this imchahi is a defining term. This is saying she's your mother, which means that your mother, who's not your father's wife, is just like your mother, who is your father's wife, which basically means for anything we discuss about father's wife, we're going to also consider your mother who's not married to your father. Same thing. And then again, we're going to apply that. So he's kind of doing the same thing Rabbi Yehuda is doing, just not with the Xer Shava. He's doing it with the words imchahi. That kind of defines every mother of yours, even if she's not married to your father, it's still going to be forbidden. Okay. This is the only super easy part, these next two lines of the daf today. Haba'al kalato. Okay, so now the Mishnah had listed someone who sleeps with his daughter-in-law. So now the pasuk about the daughter-in-law, I think it's the one pasuk I did bring you on the sheet. The pasuk about the daughter-in-law mentions the daughter-in-law and that she's your son's wife. Now, what is a daughter-in-law if not your son's wife? That is what she is. But because it mentions it in two different terms, the Gemara asks, for the Chayav Nami Mishum Eshet Beno, why aren't you liable too? Because she's also your daughter-in-law and she's also your son's wife. It's a little bit of a strange question. That's what the Gemara answers. Amar Bai, Patacha Katuv B'Kalato V'Siyem Be'Eshet Beno. Now, well, it's true. The pasuk starts with the word daughter-in-law and ends with your son's wife. Lomar Lecha Zoe Kalato Zoe Eshet Beno. To teach you, this is the same person, but you're not obviously liable to things because her whole connection to you is because she's your son's wife, and therefore it's not two separate things. Okay, now getting to the more, like I said, the more issue that's a little more complicated. Number one, we have the complicated issue of homosexuality and how we treat it in the modern world. Number two, we have the issue of bestiality, which is so foreign to us. So we got two kind of issues going on here. Now, we're going to read the Mishnah, and then I'm going to organize what we're going to do in the Gemara for you outside, which I also did on the sheet, to kind of help you, because again, we get lost in these back and forths, okay? The main thing we did in the last section, again, we brought this Braita to basically teach us, right, support Rava's reading of Rabbi Yehuda and how he read the Psukim. And from there, we got into this big ping pong between this big debate. Is your mother, who's not married to your father, right? And we had a few debates between them. Your mother who's not married to your father, your mother who is married to your father, are you liable to or only one? That was the big debate between them, which was based on all different understandings of that verse, okay? And that's what we did, a big ping pong, how they understood all those verses. Now we get into Abala Zachul Ba'ala Be'ema, someone who has homosexual relations with another man, and an animal. Now this is the initiator, okay? He's Ba'al Hazachur Ala Be'ema, V'ha'isha Mivi'at Be'ema, and a woman who brings an animal upon her to engage in relations, Biskila, they get stoned. Now, the Mishnah assumes you know this, which is also the animal gets stoned. Now, why do we know this? Because the pasuk says so. So the Mishnah asks, "Im adam chata be'ema ma chata." So I get that the man sinned or the woman sinned, but what about the animal? Right? The man initiated here. Why? What did they do? Or the woman initiated. Ella lafisha. We're going to have two explanations here. Lafisha bala adam takalal yada laficha chamar katuv tisakel. Because that animal basically caused the man or woman to get involved with them in a sexual relation, therefore the pasuk says you get stoned. Davar acher, a different way of understanding it, shalote be'emo verepeshuk v'yomru zoe sheniskal ploni al yada. We don't want animals wandering around and people talking about the animal and say, "Oh, look, that was the animal that caused so and so." They just don't want people doing what we call rechilu, or lashon hara, and talking about people even though they're dead already. But we don't want the kind of talk on the street about, "Oh, this person said this." By the way, is another. We saw this a bunch of times where even though the Torah kind of says make a public spectacle of all this, the Mishnah doesn't really seem so interested in making public spectacles of people who sinned. Okay, and here you see it again. Zachar Menalan. So this is what we're going to do, and I'm going to show you on the study guide. I didn't fill in all the details of what the answers are to all these things, but I did show you the structure here. Okay, what we're going to do is like this, and it's pretty straightforward. That's why this kind of thing, if you go through it, it looks very long-winded, but if you go through and you organize it, you kind of see the structure. So first, we're going to figure out with both Mishkav Zachor and Shochev Be'ema, how do we know that you get punished and you get punished by stone? Okay, that's number one. Then in the homosexual sugya, we're going to say, how do you know that there's a warning for this? Okay, where's the warning? And then where's the warning? Not just for someone who initiates, but someone who was initiated to them, meaning they're the passive one in the relationship. And for that, we're going to have Machlok of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, where it comes from. Then we're going to move to the Shochem Be'emas Sugya. We're going to do again the same thing. How do you know you got a punishment? In this case, it's going to be also how do you know a person who initiates relations with an animal gets punished, and also if an animal had initiated the relation with the human, that the human's going to get punished as well. Then, how do we know that there's a warning for the shochev and the nishkav? Again, we're going to have the active and the passive, and we're going to need the warning for both. Now, you don't have a warning. You don't need if you look at the parallelism here, there's one section that was only in the shochev and be'ema, and that's the nishkav. It's because in the Mishkav Zachor Pasuk, it says Shnehem Yamutu. So it's obvious whether you're the one initiating or someone initiated with you, you're the passive one. Either which way, it's clear from the pasuk that there's a punishment there because it says both die. Whereas in the animal case, it's the person initiating. How do you know if it was the animal who initiated and the person was more passive in the relationship? Then we do the azhara for both, okay, just like we did in the first section. How do you know it's forbidden? How do you know it's forbidden for both, for the active and the passive? And again, Machlok at Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. And then we're going to have a bunch of situations where there's a nafkamina, as we say, a practical relevance between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva's verses. Okay, that's the structure that we're going to do. So let's go inside. Zachar Menalan, Ditana Rabbanan. Okay, so, sorry, we still need the study guide because now we're going to go back to the psukim. Okay, so where do we get now, obviously we're going to go to the punishment psukim in Vayikra chapter 20. And we're going to see the Isha Sher Yishkav et Zachar Mishkavei Isha Toava Sushtehem Mot Yumatu Demeim Bam. You can already see from the Demeim Bam, that's how they're going to get to stoning. But first we're going to darshan a few other things. Ish Pradla Katan. Okay, it's only a person who's already chayav onshim, like 13 and 2 simanim. Asher Yishkav et Zachar. But in the second part, a man who engages in homosexual relations with a zachar, a male, it doesn't say what age. So ben gadol, ben katan, we're going to assume, even if they're a minor, we're going to have to see what's the minimum age, though, because it has to be what we call ra'oi l'bi'ah. It has to have potential to have sexual relations. And if the sexual relations are called sexual relations, when someone's too young, it's not. We're going to get to that at the end of the daf. Mishkavei isha. Okay, now this is a person who sleeps with a male, and a man who sleeps with a man, in the way that someone sleeps with a woman, which doesn't really make so much sense. So they're going to actually take this pasuk out of context and teach it for something else. Megilacha katuv shashnei mishkavot b'isha. Notice it's plural, mishkavei isha, the way you sleep with a woman in plural, like there's multiple ways to sleep with a woman. From here they learn, Amar Rabbi Yishmael, harei zabala lamed v'nimtza lamed. Okay, this really, you think it's coming to teach you something about relations with male and male. It's actually teaching you about relations with male and female. And what it's telling you is all these arayot that we've been learning, forbidden relations, so let's say a woman with her father, if they have mishkavei isha in two ways, they could have bi'ah kidarka and shalo kidarka, regular intercourse or anal intercourse. Either which way, they'll be liable. That's what it's telling you. You'll be liable for the forbidden relations of a mother and, of a daughter and father or something like that. Mot yumatu b'skila. So again, the Braita classic midrash halacha telling me b'skila. How do you know it's skila? Maybe it's some other way. Ne'amar kan demeim bam, ne'amar ba'ovi yidoni demeim bam, mal halam b'skila, avkam b'skila, as we yesterday, right? The ovi yidoni set the pace, set the trend. Every time it says demeim bam, it's stoning. That's how we know it's stoning. Onesh shamanu asara minayin. Okay, so we got punishment. Now we need to go to warning. How do you know? There's pasuk for that. Pasuk kaf bet in chapter 18. Hamalomar etzachar lo tishkav mishkavei isha toavahi. Okay, so now that is specifically talking to a person who's the shochev, the one who initiates, the active. Lamanu asara l'shochev, asara l'nishkav minayin. How do we know the person who it was done to also? Talmud Lomar lo yeh kadesh mibnei Yisrael. Now we leave Vayikra. We go to Sefer Dvarim. It says lo tiyeh kadesh sham mibnei Yisrael lo yeh kadesh mibnei Yisrael. Usually it means like a prostitute or something like that. They're going to say this pasuk kadesh mibnei Yisrael in the masculine form must be talking about homosexual relations. Now, how do we get this? Well, the Omer, because it says somewhere else in Sefer Melachim, v'gam kadesh haya ba'aretz asu kechol ha'toevot asher hagoyim asher horish. So now it calls it toeva. That seems to be the connection here. Just like by homosexuality, it calls it toeva, and here it calls it toeva. So kadesh must be connected with that. That's divrei Rabbi Yishmael. This is where Rabbi Yishmael gets the nishkav. And this is where we're going to have the big nafkamina between him and Rabbi Akiva. Because Rabbi Akiva, Omer, no tzarich. You don't need to jump to Sefer Dvarim to get it. It's in the same pasuk. The same pasuk that talk about the shochev. Okay, now let's look at it. Et zachar lo tishkav. He says, Harei Omer, et zachar lo tishkav mishkavei isha. Harei be lo tishachev. You can read that word two ways. Tishkav in Hebrew means to sleep with. Tishachev means to have someone sleep with you. And it's the same exact letters. You could just switch the vowels and it'll mean something else. So Akiva learns the whole thing from the same pasuk. Now, why is there going to be a big nafkamina here? Because if it's all learned out from the same pasuk or it's learned from two different pasukim, you can get to all different nafkaminas, as we'll see soon. Now, like I said, we're going to do the same thing, almost the same thing by behema, with one minor difference. Behema minalan detanu rabanan ish prat lekatan. So again, here we have behema. V'chol behema lo titein. Sorry, we're going to start with the punishment pasuk in chapter 20, pasuk 15. Ish asher yiten shechvato bebehema mot yumat ve'et habehema ta'arogu. So the person who sleeps with an animal will be killed, and the animal is killed. That's why I told you the animal is killed as well. Comes from the pasuk. Detanu rabanan. So again, we're going to darshan ish. What does ish mean? Prat lekatan, not a minor. Asher yitin shechvato bebehema, ben gdola ben ktana, same thing as before. The behema, it doesn't say an age, it doesn't say, well, obviously it wouldn't say ish, but it doesn't matter what age the animal is. Mot yumat b'skila, same thing as before, except we're going to have to figure out, because it doesn't say demehem bam, atam wer b'skila, how do you know it's stoning? Maybe it's something else. Ne'amar kan ta'arogu, v'ne'amar lahalan ki harog tahargedu. Well, here it says et habehema ta'arogu. Now, where else do we have those words? Jumping down to Dvarim, chapter 13, Psukim, Yud Aleph Yud Bet, which is talking about a mesit. Mesit is someone who gets someone else to do worship idols. And there it says, Uskalto ba'avanim in Pasuk Yud Bet. And in Pasuk Yud Aleph, it says, Ki harog targenu. Someone who gets other people to worship idols gets killed. And how killed? Avanim. So we learned taharogu, same, targenu, same thing. Ma'alahalam b'skila, avkam b'skila. Okay, so first thing was, how do we learn what the punishment is? We got that, stoning. Lamanu onesh l'shochev, onesh l'nishkav minalam. But if we didn't learn here, like I said, with the zachar, it said both of them die. So it was clear the punishment is for both. Here, it doesn't say that. It just says isha shochevim be'ema. So how do you know if the animal engaged in relations with the person? The person was more passive. Talmud lamal, kol shochevim be'ema mot yumat. Now we jump to another pasuk. Out of Vayikra again. In Shmot Kaf Bet pasuk Yuchet, says, Kol shochevim be'ema mot yumat. Now, that's the same thing as it says in Vayikra. Both of them are someone who engages in relation with an animal. They're both the initiator in this pasuk. Well, well, you don't need it to tell us that because it says it in Vayikra that. So, Tanei Unyan L'Nishkav, this is the classic when psukim repeat, and there seems to be no point for the repetition. It must be talking about something else. So if it's not the shochev, it must be the nishkav. Lamanu onesh ben l'shochev ben l'nishkav. Tov. We dealt with the first issue, punishment for both the active and the more passive. Az haraminayin. How do we know the warning? Talmud Lamal. Again, we're going to go to Vayikra where the warnings are. And we're going to go to chapter 18, verse 23. Ubechol behema lo titen shechvatcha l'tama ba. Okay, so that's very clear. Don't titen shechvatcha, don't initiate. So lamanu asara l'shochev. So we got the initiator. L'nishkav, the more passive one, minayin. Talmud Lomar. Again, Rabbi Yishmael is going to darshan the same thing. Lo yeh kadesh mi b'nei Yisrael. Okay, now even though it doesn't say toeva here, and that's not really the connection, we don't know why he says this, but he thinks that kadesh is also talking about this. Now, soon we're going to see a different interpretation, and that's why, because it doesn't really seem as connected, but that's what we have Rabbi Yishmael is saying here. Ve'omer v'gam kadesh ha'ba'aretz, etc. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael, same thing he said before. Rabbi Akiva Omer, you know, tzarich, and he's going to do the same thing he did before. It says, Harei Omer lo titein shichvatcha. That was in the pasuk, right? Pasuk Kaf Gimel here in Vayikra Yuchet. Lo titein shichvatcha, the same way he said lo tishkav, lo tishachev, lo titein shichvatcha, lo titein shichivatcha. Okay, if one engages in with you. Okay, so we can again play with the vowels. Now we're going to start with all our nafkaminas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. So again, Rabbi Yishmael in both cases thinks both for Mishkav Zachor and Shochev Be'ema, it's lo yeh kadesh, it's right a different pasuk entirely that you're going to get the warning for the nishka. And Rabbi Akiva says it comes from the same pasuk. It's just you can say vowels differently. So Amar Abala Zachor vehevi alav Zachal. What if you were both active and passive in two different situations in homosexual relations, and you didn't realize it was forbidden? So the whole thing is what we call he'elem echad. And then the question is, when you realize that you made a mistake, Do you have to bring one sin offering or two? And that's going to be, well, if you learned it all from the same pasuk, then you only have to bring one sin offering. If you learn each one from different pasukim, you're going to have to bring two. So Amar Rabbi Avahu, L'divrei Rabbi Yishmael chayav shtayim, chad milo tishkav, v'chad milo yekadesh, because they're two totally different pasukim. L'divrei Rabbi Akiva eno chayav el echad, but according to Rabbi Akiva, only one, because lo tishkav, lo tishachev, chadi, that's all one pasuk. And same thing with habala be'ema. Habala be'ema, ve'vi be'ema alav, same thing. You engage a relationship with an animal, one is an active and then as passive. Amar Rabbi Avahu, l'divrei Rabbi Yishmael chayav shtayim, chad milo titein shechvatcha, v'chad milo yekadesh. Again, learn from different verses. L'divrei Rabbi Akiva eno chayav el echad, shchavtecha, u'shchivatcha chadihi. However, when it comes to the animal, I already told you we're going to have a different interpretation. Abaye amal, afilu l'divrei Rabbi Yishmael, nami eno chayav el echad. Even according to Rabbi Yishmael, you're only chayav one. Why? Lo yekadesh b'gavriktiv. Lo yekadesh is only with a person, meaning mishkav zachor, but not for animals. That's not what it was talking about. So now, according to Abaye, we have to see, so what would Rabbi Yishmael say the warning is? So this line here, that the warning for nishkav minayin in a shochev and be'eman bestiality is not from lo yekadesh, according to Abaye. Okay? What's he going to say? So, nafkale mikol shochev and behema mot yumat. Now, again, we have the repeat pasuk. Remember, you're going to die if you sleep with the animal. So, now remember, that's punishment. That's not warning. So we have to do what? We're going to repeat what we said before about that pasuk and add one more thing. Well, since you have two pasukim that's saying you're going to die if you sleep with an animal, it must be referred to being passive. Now, he has to add this line. Why did it call someone who's passive active? Well, it must be to teach you, just like the one who was shochev was warned and also punished. Also, the nishkav is going to be considered as if warned and punished. Okay, there's a bit of a jump, but that's how he explains it. Okay, another nafkamina. And here again, we're going to see the difference between Abaye and Rabbi Avahu's explanation of Rabbi Yishmael. Hanirbala zachar v'hanirbala be'ema. Okay, so until now we took within zachar both options. Yeah, active, passive. Within an animal, active and passive. Now we're going to go to passive in both animal and homosexual relations. Okay, so nirbala zachar, nirbala be'ema. So now I'm Rabbi Avahu, the divrei Rabbi Akiva chayav shtayim. Now here it's going to be flipped because Rabbi Akiva has two different pasukim. Because while he changes the nikud between the passive and the active, but he has a different pasuk for the animal and for the zachar. Et zachar lo tishkav, lo tishachet. Lo titein shechvatcha by the animal, shchivatcha. So that's two different pasukim. But, right, chad milo tishkav, chad milo titein shechvatcha. L'divrei Rabbi Yishmael, he learns the whole thing according to Rabbi Avahu from lo yekadesh, and that one's lo yekadesh. You did both those things. They're both learned out from the same pasuk. Eno chayav ela echad. Idi v'idi mi lo yekadesh. Now, Abaye, obviously, who thinks that the second one of Shchev Be'ema is not learned from Lo Kadesh, then, according to Abaye, Amar, Afilu de Rabbi Yishmael, Nami Chayav Shtayim, because what's he learned from? This is just a review. Kol Shochev Be'ema Mot Yumad, Im Eno Inyan L'Shochev T'nei Inyan L'Nishkav, V'achar Yom Chan L'Nishkav L'Chon Shochev, Ma Shochev Anash V'Yisir, Av Nishkav Anash V'Yisir. I'm not going to repeat that. That's what we just said. That's where he gets Kol Shochev Be'ema Mot Yumad, ultimately leads him to say also Nishkav. And by Mishkav Zachor, it's Lo Yekadesh, two different psukim, you'll obviously get two different punishments, right? You'll have to bring two sin offerings. Aval. But this one last case here, Habal has Zachor, Vehevi Zachar Alav, Habal Be'ema, Vehevi Be'ema Alav. Now, what if you did all four? You did Mishkav Zachor, Shochev and Be'ema, and Nishkav in both. Okay, now, Bein LeRabbi Avahu, Bein LaAbaye, LeRabbi Yishmael Chayav Shalosh. There's going to be an overlap in one case according to all of them. According to Rabbi Yishmael, according to Rabbi Avahu, Lo Yekadesh is an overlap. And according to Abaye, there's Lo Yekadesh is one, but Etzachar Lo Tishkav and Shichvatcha, we're going to learn by the Behema pasuk is both, you're learning both from one word, the Shochev. The Shochev is going to include the Shochev and the Nishkav. So either which way, there's an overlap somewhere. So you're only going to get to three. And the Rabbi Akiva, you're obviously only going to have two because it's Achar Lo Tishkav Lo Tishachev and Shichvatcha Shchivatcha. So you're going to have two altogether. And Rabbi Yishmael, you're going to have three. Either which way you learn it because there's some overlap of psukim somewhere. Okay, last topic for today. Tanu Ramanan, Zachor Lo Asubo Katan Kigadol. Behema asuba ktana kigdola. Okay, what does this mean? Zachor lo asubo katan kigadol. So, my lo asu bo katan kigadol, amarav, lo asu bi'at pachot mi ben tesha shanim ki ben tesha shanim. There's a difference between less than 9 and above 9, because for a man, in general, it's not considered sexual relations unless the man is 9 years old. Otherwise, it's not. For a woman, it's 3. This is a very hard topic, another complicated topic to discuss and to understand properly. The rabbis understood a woman is already from the age of 3, potentially someone engaged in a relationship with her. God forbid that should ever happen, but it's considered sexual relations. For a man, it's only 9. So 9 in a day. So therefore, if a man who's older engaged in sexual relations with a minor under 9, that's not considered. Above 9, it is considered. And again, only the older one will be punished, not the younger one. But Shmuel disagrees and says, Lo asu b'yapachami ben shalosh shanim ke ben shalosh shanim. Comes to homosexual relations, the man is considered ra'oi l'bi'ah at age 3, like a woman. Why is that? The Ma'ika miflagei Rav Savar kol de'ibete b'shochev ite b'nishkav v'chol de'leite b'shochev leite b'nishkav. Rav says whatever is true for the shochev is true for the nishkav. Okay, that the initiator is the same as for the one who is initiated too. But Shmuel Savar Mishkavei Ishaktiv. Shmuel says, no, there's a special drasha here because it says Mishkavei Isha. Therefore, we're going to treat it like an Isha, where if one engaged in a relationship with someone over 3, it's already considered, they're already liable, basically. You might say, like, this is crazy, but on the other hand, it's basically making people liable for engaging in relations with a child over 3, which they should be, right? So there's a certain element of that to it, and we're going to stop here for today. Okay, so long daf, complicated daf. The basic summary, I'm going to do it in very short, is we had the issue with the mother, who's also the father's wife. Are you liable, 1 or 2? Rabbi Yehuda, the rabbis, and from that we got into a big ping pong between all their opinions. Then we got into the Zachor and the Behemah, those 2 issues, and we had to go through all of them. Where's the punishment? Where's the warning? Where's the warning for both the active and the not active participant? And where's the punishment for both of those? And then we got to, the machloka between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yishmael about the warning for the passive one, and then from there we got into the nafkaminas between them. With that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone Shavua Tov and Shishma B'Sorot Tovot.